You are tuned into the Dr. Tyna Show with Dr. Tyna Moore. For more, visit drtyna.com. Hey guys, welcome back to the Dr. Tyna Show. On this episode, I am very excited to share with you something that I am certain that you guys don't know, and I am nearly certain that 99% of doctors don't know. And it is the 7 ways that GLP1 agonists like Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy, how these peptides actually heal your metabolism and help improve metabolic health that have nothing to do with what you've been hearing. And so I'm going to go through some biochemistry here. Hang on with me. I'll try to make it as user-friendly as possible. But I have got some information that I think you need to hear because people are not understanding this peptide. They are vilifying it. They are misinterpreting studies, or they're overblowing studies. I'm seeing so much clickbait, you guys. I can't deal with it anymore. Oh, it's embarrassing for these people. I'm like, sure, you flashed the title of the study up, folks, but you didn't read the study. So without getting into all of that, let's get into the top 7 ways that GLP-1 agonists are improving your metabolic health that you don't know, and I am certain your doctor probably doesn't know. So I'm in a hotel in Salinas, California. I am adventuring right now with my husband, and we landed here last night, and we're headed on our way home back to Oregon. So please excuse the setup, but I'm sitting in front of a window, and this is as good as we got. My glasses are a bit dirty, so here we go. So what everyone thinks GLP-1 agonists do, and this is true, but this is like the kindergarten version, the 101. This is what you're hearing everywhere. This is what, every time I turn on the news and I see somebody talking about GLP-1s, every time I open YouTube and someone's like, I'm going to tell you how GLP-1s work. This is the same stuff that they parrot over and over. Number 1, they promote insulin secretion appropriately. However, that's the part everyone misses. They don't just crank out insulin. I know that insulin resistance is the issue at hand, right? And everybody's so worried. Well, if insulin resistance is the issue, we don't need more insulin. That's not how they work. They secrete insulin secretion appropriately when needed, and it becomes a much more healthy pulsing than what was happening in the individual's body before. They promote appropriate appetite control. So dose too high, you're going to get into appetite suppression, but done appropriately, you're going to get appetite control. And this allows people to have more control over the vices in their life, one of them being food, but there's many other benefits too. So appetite suppression, appetite control, decrease in food intake. And this has everybody arguing, even some of the smartest doctors on the internet saying, oh, well, this proves that it's just the calories in, calories out model. That's how you lose weight. Oh, no, you guys, 1980 called. They want their busted weight loss theories back. That's not it. That ain't it, you guys. Delayed gastric emptying, so people feel fuller longer. And this all ultimately leads to fat reduction. This is how it's being shared, but this is the kindergarten version, right? This is how people are explaining it everywhere, and this is the kindergarten version. I'm going to share with you 7 ways that you don't know. And again, I'm very sure your doctor doesn't know. Maybe a few of the savvy ones that know their peptides, but everybody else, I'm pretty sure has no idea. So number 1, they decrease glucagon concentrations in the body. So glucagon works sort of opposite insulin. And long story short, our bodies sequester glucose into our muscles and into our liver to be used as fuel later when we need it, like when a tiger's chasing us and we need to run away, or after we've slept for 8 hours and we wake up and we need fuel. Our cells need fuel. And this is where glucagon comes in. So glucagon is a glucoregulatory peptide hormone that is also secreted by the pancreas, by the way, little neighboring cells that to the ones that secrete insulin. And ultimately, it stimulates hepatic glucose production and thus increases blood glucose levels when needed. GLP-1s lower glucagon secretion and therefore lower glucose concentrations in the blood. So we get a healthier insulin pulse and we get some glucagon suppression. This is actually a really important concept. Number 2, it increases insulin sensitivity. The underlying issue with metabolic dysfunction is basically 3 major things. Number 1, insulin resistance. Number 2, lack of muscle. And number 3, lack of exercise. And I'll add a 4th one, which is the overarching theme. Lack of glucose sinks, lack of GLUT4 transporters on the cellular membrane of our bodies to let glucose in the cell to be used as fuel. So GLP-1s can help induce certain pathways like AMPK, SIRT1, which ultimately leads to PGC1 alpha stimulation, which ultimately leads to optimized mitochondrial function, which ultimately leads to better glucose disposal. So we are supercharging the mitochondria through activation of these pathways that we can also activate through exercise and through caloric restriction. So if we can get some appetite control for the individual and they can suppress their appetite a bit, or just at least get it to a place where they're able to go, from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. without eating, that's a nice intermittent fast window, then we're going to be activating these pathways twofold, right? We're going to double up, we're going to stack. The third most awesome way to activate these pathways is through exercise. The actual act of muscle contractions also helps get that GLUT4 receptor translocated to the cellular membrane to open up and let the glucose in to be used as fuel. So instead of just worrying about insulin sensitivity over here and having that be the whole strategy, well, I'm going to go low carb, I'm going to get more insulin sensitive. Yes. And we have other tools at our disposal, like exercise, like intermittent fasting, like muscle contractions, building muscle. We have those and we stack them. And also GLP1 agonists activate these pathways. So we're not using it as a substitute. That is silly and short-sighted, and that is not a good way to do medicine. We are stacking them. This is why I say the lifestyle modifications are non-negotiable. The strength training is non-negotiable. Start with the strength training, actually. But we can utilize GLP-1s and very likely in much lower doses, where this is where my microdosing strategy comes into play. We're doing all the other things and we're stacking these therapeutics so that we can get optimal AMPK SIRT1 pathway activation. So it's pretty awesome. It's a pretty awesome peptide that way, you guys, and it helps potentiate the other efforts we're putting forth and gets them to work better. Number 3, GLP-1s protect muscle. And I've talked about this at length in other episodes. I have a whole episode all about how it protects muscle and how it may actually be somewhat anabolic. And you can go back and listen to that. I'll put it in the show notes. But long story short, these peptides help heal and regenerate pathologic tissue, really, when you think of it. And the way that I look at regeneration is not necessarily, you put some muscle cells in a petri dish and you drip GLP-1 on and it'll make more muscle cells. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the pathological pathways that start to take hold in the insulin resistant and metabolically compromised muscle. That muscle becomes pathologic. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon does a beautiful job of breaking this down and saying, not all muscle is alike. The muscle of a type 2 diabetic is a very different type of tissue than the muscle of somebody who is insulin sensitive, metabolically sound, having good training, regularly training their skeletal muscle. That's a very different muscle. It behaves very differently in the body. And it does very different things with our signaling peptide hormones, with our hormones in general, with inflammatory markers, et cetera, anti-inflammatory markers. So GLP-1s start to help transform that muscle back into a healthier state. And it does so through, to some degree, like reperfusion of microvasculature into the muscle, which allows essential amino acids to get in there, which allow, if we're eating them and consuming them, which allows for improved muscle protein synthesis. This is almost an anabolic impact on the muscle. And we have studies in humans and aging humans showing this. So it's protective, it's healing to the muscle. And so when I say regenerative, what I mean is we are abating that pathological process. It's awesome on muscle, bones, joints, cartilage, you name it. It's doing really incredible things. Now, I think here the dose makes the poison. If we overdose somebody, they're going to go into a catabolic state and they're going to waste away and we're going to lose muscle tissue and we're probably going to lose bone and hair and teeth too. So the dose makes the poison, and this is where my microdosing strategy comes in. I go in deep inside my paid program, Ozempic Done Right University, on my clinical rationale for microdosing. What you're hearing out there, when the term is getting around, I'm hearing from doctors and pharmacists, the term is really getting around out there. And there are folks saying, I've been microdosing my patients for years. And when I inquire to what their dosing strategy is, they're actually just starting folks at the standard starting dose, which I think is way too high for most people, especially those of us who are already doing all the things and are 99% metabolically sound. The standard starting dose is way too high. I'm utilizing a fraction of that, but that fraction only works when you're doing all the other things and you come to the peptide already in pretty good shape and pretty good health. Microdosing is reserved for those who are metabolically optimized already. We just need a little bit of tinkering. It's not that successful in those who are really metabolically compromised. Those folks are going to need a more standard dose, but low dosing GLP-1 agonists is not microdosing. So starting somebody at the standard starting dose, and then these docs are even just going to the next tier, which is a doubling of the dose within 4 weeks. I think that's bonkers and not even necessary in those who are metabolically compromised. I think those folks need to go much slower and lower, but I'm going to leave it up to you and your doctor. Just know I'm getting messages from almost daily, literally almost daily, from either colleagues or my followers saying, I'm microdosing GLP-1s either in my patients or I'm microdosing it on myself. And I feel awful. What am I doing wrong? I feel awful. And I'm like, you're not microdosing, you're overdosing. I'm talking utilizing a fraction of the starting dose. And then I'm getting messages from people almost every day too, saying, I tried your microdosing strategy, although they have no idea what my microdosing strategy is because they didn't take my course and they don't know me and they are just guesstimating based on the information I've shared out in different podcasts, and it didn't work. And I'm like, well, didn't work for what? Because there's no way a microdose is going to work for weight loss in an obese, metabolically compromised person. I never said that. I've been very clear from day one that this strategy is reserved for those of us who are metabolically optimized already. If you're not metabolically optimized and you want to utilize GLP-1s, then a very slow and low strategy is what you're going to want to do so you don't get side effects.
You guys, there's a problem on the island of Maui. In 1959, 9 axis deer were introduced to the island, and they are an invasive species. Their population has exploded, and they're now devastating the island of Maui's ecosystem. Left unchecked, Maui is in trouble. Fortunately, the folks at Maui Nui have stepped in to right the ship. They're wild harvesting these axis deer, utilizing humane, stress-free hunting methods as a way to bring this food source to our plates. Maui Nui is the only source for Maui's exceptionally healthy, delicious, wild harvested axis deer meat. Venison is one of the healthiest red meat species on the planet. The omega ratios in these animals are unmatched with their high protein content. I'm loving their meat sticks right now, and I'm keeping them on hand at all times so I can hit my protein macros throughout the day and not make poor food choices. Each stick is 10 grams of protein, and they have kept me thriving all summer. Usually you have to have a hot husband who knows how to hunt well to get venison in your freezer, but now you can buy direct from Maui Nui. Here's the catch. Supplies are limited by nature. Responsible population management means they won't go beyond harvest capacity. Memberships are the best way to support the mission and provide access to this one-of-a-kind protein. Secure your spot now. Maui Nui Venison is offering Dr. Tyna Show listeners 20% off your first purchase of jerky, sticks, fresh venison, and bone broth while supplies last. Visit www.mauinuivenison.com/Dr. Tyna for 20% off. If you've been a listener of the Dr. Tyna Show for any amount of time, then you know how much I love beef. Beef is truly a superfood. It's chock full of so many nutrients that you can't readily find elsewhere. It's low allergen and it's relatively easy to digest. Plus, when it's fermented, like in my favorite snack, Paleo Valley beef sticks, these nutrients become even more bioavailable. So I think of Paleo Valley beef sticks as not only my favorite snack food, but little portable nutrient-rich packets of protein. The other reason I love them is because these beef sticks are made with 100% grass-fed and finished beef that comes from small American-owned farms that practice rotational grazing. Rotational grazing is when farmers literally rotate the pastures in which their cattle graze, so they aren't feeding on the same soil forever, which can lead to nutrient depletion in the soil and the cattle. This makes the meat in Paleo Valley beef sticks even more nutrient rich. And they use old world methods of fermentation, which gives the beef sticks a long shelf life without the use of harmful acids and chemical preservatives. These are portable, nutrient rich, and clean little packets of protein that you, your kids, and your grandkids will love. So keep them on hand. I've got Paleo Valley beef sticks literally stashed everywhere in case of emergency. You can save 15% off right now on your first order by heading over to paleovalley.com/Dr. Tyna. When it comes to healthy hormones, healthy menopause, healthy bones, healthy joints, all of it is contingent on good metabolic health. And unfortunately, most Americans are falling short in that department. In fact, nearly 100% of U.S. adults are struggling with good cardiometabolic health. I've teamed up with the folks at NutriSense because I absolutely love their continuous glucose monitor program. They've got great customer service, a great product, a really cool app, and access to expert dietitians throughout the program. At the very least, give yourself the gift of a 1-month subscription. If you're really struggling, consider a 3, 6, or even 12-month subscription. If you use code Dr. Tyna, all capital letters, at checkout, you'll get $30 off your first purchase. And you're going to want to follow the link in the show notes.
But that said, there is a whole comprehensive toolkit that I'm using over here that I go deep into inside my program that you're going to want to join and learn about if you're a practitioner, if you're the general public. For a limited time, I'm still letting the general public in, but we're shutting that down pretty soon. So get in there. It's a beefy course, and the only way out is through, and the only way through is to be educated and empowered. And I'm telling you, most doctors have no clue how to do this appropriately. They're just simply bringing people up to either starting them at standard starting dose and ramping them up very quickly, which is a disaster waiting to happen. But they also don't know how to deal with maintenance. They don't know how to cycle. They don't know how to rotate. They have no clue what that even means. And they have no idea how to titrate you down if you want to get off of it. They just shut you off. It's a mess. So that's a longer conversation. I don't want to take up too much time on this episode because I wanted to keep this succinct, but trust me, get the course while it's the price point it is, while it's available to the public so that you can educate yourself and you can go in and have an educated conversation with your practitioner, because people from all over the world are messaging me saying, I heard you on so-and-so's podcast, and can you refer me to somebody in my area who practices like you do? And I'm like, if I know, to be totally honest with you and not to be vulgar, but like, I have no clue. I don't even know who amongst my friends and like the people I think are doing it right, I find out later are actually starting people often at too high a dose, in my opinion. So I have no idea who I would refer you to. Inside my program is probably 50% practitioners or just over at this point. And we do have a spreadsheet of all of those people who have at least enrolled in the course. I have no idea what their skill set is. I have no idea if they've even completed the modules, so I'm not recommending them, but they are enrolled in the course, so they at least have access to what the big comprehensive picture looks like, because there's a lot more to this than just microdosing or macrodosing GLP-1 agonists. Think of it like a symphony. We need all the instruments and we need the conductor to make the symphony sound cohesive and work well, right? Otherwise, we're cranking monotherapy on one thing or another. We're either cranking up hormones or we're cranking up peptides. And that is not the elegant way to do things. And that certainly isn't conducive to longevity. So back to my 7 things that you and your doctor probably don't know about how GLP-1s improve your metabolic health beyond the kindergarten version that you keep hearing on the news channels. Number 4, it improves insulin sensitivity in the fat tissue. So the adipose tissue becomes insulin resistant and it becomes metabolically compromised itself. And when that happens, all hell breaks loose in the body. These cells get infiltrated by immune cells. Those immune cells shift into a form that's very pro-inflammatory. You get immune compromise. You get metabolic health compromise. It feeds forward and potentiates itself. It's like a chicken and egg at that point. It gets very, very messy. This is, in my opinion, the driving factor behind the poor outcomes of the past 4+ years that we've been seeing with a certain virus going around. This is what I've been trying to explain to people, is that when your fat cells go rogue, as I call it, all hell breaks loose in the body and it becomes a very vicious cycle that's challenging to get out of. There is a way to abate this, but it gets harder and harder and harder the older someone is, or the more metabolically compromised, or the more inflamed somebody is. And the more rogue their adipose fat cells have gone, the more challenging it is to not only pull them back, but keep them there. This is the point that so few people understand about weight loss. Again, 1980 called, they want their busted, eat less and move more strategy back because it ain't working. This is because I believe at the core of this is when the fat cells go rogue. What happens when you're young is you add more fat cells. This is why it is so important to get children the interventions they need, whatever that may be. Obviously, lifestyle is at the core platform of all the things I recommend. But if they do need some interventions, this is important because they're adding fat cells to their body. But as we age, we just fill up our fat cells. And it's the ultra full fat cell that it's like a gremlin when you feed them after midnight, right? Remember that in the movie Gremlins? You feed them after midnight or you get them wet or whatever, and they turn into gremlins. That's, the cute little thing. That's what happens to fat cells when they get super full. They get inflamed, they get pissed off, and the feed forward cycle of that is very challenging for individuals to get out of. When it gets really severe, these are the folks that I think do need the higher doses of the GLP-1s, and they're probably going to be on them for life because there's a shift that has occurred, and sometimes we can't pull people back over the other side of it. That shift is always going to want to go that direction. So what happens with with the GLP-1s is so chronic inflammation in the adipose tissue is a major cause of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and further obesity. GLP-1 reduces the endoplasmic reticulum stress. These are these little organelles inside your cells, and they actually are responsible for building and folding proteins appropriately in the body. Misfolded proteins is chaos. We don't want them. So GLP-1 reduces ER stress, which is a key factor in the development of metabolic syndrome. Unresolved ER stress has been implicated in a variety of metabolic disorders, including type 2 diabetes and obesity. This is where I think feed-forward potentiation is when that endoplasmic reticulum gets screwball. GLP-1 regulates key genetic pathways that have to do with protein folding in the fat cells themselves that, when dysregulated, leads to fat gain. Perturbations in ER homeostasis create this condition of ER stress that lead to activation of this complex signaling cascade called the unfolded protein response. Intervening on ER stress is critical when we want to modulate the signaling components of this UPR, which GLP-1s do. So they're acting at an organelle level inside the cell to help improve how that cell behaves and how it plays out in a way that helps mitigate further potentiation of insulin resistance and obesity gain. And like I said earlier, it's acting on specific pathways that help improve mitochondrial function. So ER dysfunction and mitochondrial dysfunction are at the root core of this adipocyte fat cell gone rogue problem, and actually many cells of our body. So GLP-1 is acting directly there to help regulate these pathways. I think it's incredible. I mean, it's just incredible. And this is where the people screaming that this drug should be recalled, I'm embarrassed for those people. There are people right now who've got big platforms, big stages, have just been on big television shows screaming that this drug should be recalled. I'm like, first, it's not a drug. Second of all, you're not a practitioner of any sort, so you have no idea. Number three, it's a peptide, which is regenerative. It's not a drug. Number four, they don't understand what I'm telling you, what I'm sharing here. And this is important even for those who have just put on 15, 20 pounds. If you're in middle age and your hormones are dropping, man or woman, and you suddenly get the middle-aged middle starts creeping up, that's this going on. That's these problems I've just described are happening in real time. And so to hear people in their 30s screaming that these drugs should be recalled it's dangerous misinformation, which is so weird for me to say, because I've been accused of that for years, talking about my beliefs around metabolic dysfunction as the driving force of poor outcomes in the past few years with the you-know-what going around. So it's unethical to not understand how something works and withhold it from a patient if you're a practitioner. Number two, it's just lunacy to see non-healthcare people screaming to have certain things recalled. I'm like, just because the dosing strategy around it in the allopathic community at large, I believe, is too high, too fast, too much, it's not the peptide's fault. That's a dosing and management issue. That has nothing to do with the need of recalling something. We just need to treat it better. We don't overdose people on insulin and then blame the insulin, right? We blame the doctor overdosing, or we blame, if a key factor in the success of a medication or peptide to work is patient compliance, we don't blame the peptide when the patient doesn't do anything and doesn't exercise and doesn't eat well, right? So there's a lot of factors here to be considered before we start recalling peptides that are virtually life-saving. And I've never seen anything quite like these. And I'm talking about using, again, fractions of the starting dose, which means we need it compounded. This isn't available through big pharma. You can't get fractions of the starting dose from the pens that are pre-filled. This is a compounded thing. It has nothing to do with big pharma. I'm talking about utilizing compounded medications in a safe and effective way, elegantly, as part of a comprehensive treatment program. Again, I go into this very deep inside my paid program so that if you're a practitioner, you can understand how to treat your patients better. And if you are the general public, you will educate and inform yourself and walk into your doctor with, I also have a 30 plus page document that's growing with all the studies that I find that I'm dumping into this document. So you can go in armed and say, hey, I want to have a conversation. This is the data I found. I think this peptide could be helpful for me. Here's a list of compounding pharmacies that's also available inside the course. Can you help me make this happen, right? This is how we work with our doctors, like a teammate. They're not gods and you're not helpless. It's a team effort to group effort. You have to be compliant. You have to do all the things. You have to do all the lifestyle pieces if you want this to, even if you high dose it, if you want this to work, you have to do all the lifestyle pieces. But that said, your doctor needs to be a team player too. And if he or she isn't, you need to find a new one. There's actually a whole module on how to find a good doctor in there too. So anyway, back to the fat cells gone rogue. GLP-1 can also improve insulin signaling by decreasing the expression of certain genes in the stressed ER adipocytes that are responsible for further fat gain and exacerbation of obesity, further amplifying the ER stress. So it breaks the cycle, which I think is just phenomenal. Many studies have suggested that the effect of GLP-1 on insulin sensitivity is attributable to the suppression of weight gain. However, 2016 study and others have shown, this was done with exenatide, which is like the OG original GLP-1 agonist, improves both hepatic and adipose tissue insulin resistance. So we get insulin resistance in our fat, we get insulin resistance in our liver. And when that happens, it's a whole downstream. I mean, we're talking hormones are getting involved, like estrogen, testosterone, inflammatory markers are getting on board, and we can improve that whole breakdown of metabolic dysfunction by affecting the liver and the adipose tissue and the insulin resistance in those organs. So anyway, this is huge. Immune cells. We have GLP-1 receptors on our immune cells, you guys, on our macrophages in particular, which is a big deal. You've heard probably about histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome. This is something to be considering. And GLP-1 can improve insulin resistance in the macrophages. So we get insulin resistance in our immune cells by inhibiting the NF-kappa B pathway. It also has an impact on TNF alpha. So these are cytokine pathways. And when our immune cells have gone rogue, we now become a little inflammatory factory. And it's being driven by the inflammatory fat, which is being driven by the inflamed liver and the fatty infiltrate in the muscle and in the liver and in the pancreas that's also inflamed. So it's a real vicious cycle, and GLP-1s help cut this at virtually every step of the way and get it back under control. So when we can slow the roll of these secretion of inflammatory cytokines, we're winning. Inflammation, GLP-1 has anti-inflammatory properties. We've seen this in multiple studies that could help inhibit insulin resistance. So this kind of pulls together everything I've just said. When that inflammation starts brewing in the body, all of these other things go with it concomitantly. And that's the vicious cycle. That's very difficult to break. I'm telling you, eat less and move more is not always going to cut it. Even for people like myself who are very lean with, low body fat percentages, eat less and move more isn't always it. I have a funny immune system. It likes to go rogue on me. It likes to be inflamed. And it takes a lot to keep that dampened down. Even eating like a saint, to the point where I'm eating such a restrictive diet, I can't function in the world. Still, my body wants to go to a more inflammatory state. Something we need to consider that I think a lot of these folks online screaming about how evil these peptides are, that who clearly don't understand them. Because anybody who is intelligent, who actually has taken the time to understand them, doesn't trash on them. It's embarrassing when I see people trashing, especially doctors. Other doctors see trashing on them. I'm like, you're just showing me your ignorance. You're just waving the flag that you didn't do your homework. And I don't think any doctor gets to be ignorant of how these peptides work anymore, because they're everywhere. They're here to stay. Whether non-doctors are screaming for their recall or not, they're life-saving and they're life-changing, but they need to be done differently. The way that they're being done, I think, is very problematic. I go into this in my 4-part free video training series. I have a free series of videos, and it's at drtyna.com. That's DRTYNA / Ozempic Uncovered. From there, you actually will get offered, I think on part 4 video, you'll get offered my course, Ozempic Done Right University, and you'll get a nice discount there. So that's the best way to go into it and to get the discount and to learn the most, because I take you on an educational journey that whether you love them or hate them, this will change your perspective, because people need to know what's going on here, and we're not being told the whole truth. And in fact, we're being spun a lot of clickbaity, propagandized titles. I just saw one come across news publication I really respect, and it was just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's about the World Health Organization's latest publication in JAMA about how GLP-1s cause suicidal ideation. It's not true. They don't cause anything. It's correlative. The authors of the study actually gave a big old paragraph of all the limitations and saying we should take this with a grain of salt, essentially. and also the people who did have suicidal ideation. If my numbers are right, I'm reading it right off the study, it was 107 people out of 36 million. And of them, several were on antidepressants and benzodiazepines. They probably went into this having some suicidal ideation. So anyway, something to consider. People who are grabbing headlines and putting them all over their social media accounts and demanding recalls maybe should learn how to read a study before they throw it up, because that's ridiculous. That's actually the behavior of the side we're fighting against, right? We don't behave like that. We share things that we're educated about. We don't scream about things that we don't know anything about. And when we haven't read the study that we're sharing out, that's embarrassing. Let's tie this all back together. Chronic inflammation in adipose tissue or fat cells is the cause of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Chronic inflammation in the muscles is what starts and potentiates insulin resistance and diabetes. This is fundamental to understand, and GLP-1s break that vicious cycle. And then the last way is that GLP-1s may alleviate insulin resistance in the brain. They're anti-inflammatory in the brain. They're neuroregenerative. We have studies on mice and rats showing remyelination of the demyelinated nervous tissue up there. I mean, it's crazy what these peptides do. And if we can get the insulin resistance centrally to chill out, everything starts centrally and everything moves peripherally. So this is where my research with GLP-1 started. I immediately was Googling GLP-1s in the brain. And that's where I started with this whole journey that's led me here. And when I saw how they impacted the brain, I immediately knew, because I am also a chiropractor and we are very good at neurophysiology. I know people think that chiropractors just rack and crack, but we actually have an incredible neuroanatomy and neurophysiology education, at least the school I went to. And everything starts in the brain, and that's control central. So if we want to impact organ systems downstream and tissues downstream peripherally, we have to figure out how to treat and impact centrally. And this is where GLP-1s, I believe, really shine. All right, so that is it. Those are the 7 ways that you probably didn't know, and I don't think your doctor did either, on how GLP-1s improve and help heal your metabolic health. And it has a lot more to do with all these nuanced biochemical pathways and genetic pathways than it does eat less, appetite suppression, keeps your stomach from emptying, and so you feel fuller longer. Like, that is like the kindergarten version. I just gave you the 12th grade college version. So hopefully that's helpful. If you guys like this episode, please follow me on YouTube, rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast player. It helps get the word out. And we reached the top 5, you guys. The Dr. Tyna Show hit the top 5 of all alternative health and on Apple Podcasts recently. It was very exciting. I think I'm still somewhere in the top 10 right now as of recording this. It goes all over the place all the time, but really excited moment. And you guys did that. You guys did that. Thank you so much. I can't even tell you. I am trying to spread the truth as I know it. And I try to break down information for you in a way that's understandable and digestible, because if you don't know the basics of what you're getting into with things, I really think we're just sitting ducks in this current climate. I think the medical system at large is really busted. I think not all the doctors are, but I think at large, the system itself is corrupt. And if we don't learn how to take care of ourselves, and we don't empower ourselves and educate ourselves about what we're putting in our body and really understand the mechanism of action as best we can, then, you're just under the assumption that everybody's doing the right thing by you. And that isn't always the case. So I want to make sure you guys have full informed consent about everything that you get your hands on, that at least I know about and can share about. So anyway, grab my 4-part free video series, drtyna.com/Ozempic Uncovered. If you are interested, check out the course, grab it while it's still the price point it is, because we're getting continuing education credits soon. We are definitely ramping up the price because it's a beefy course, and it's going to be delegated to practitioners only very soon. And that information won't be available to the general public anymore. So anyway, without further ado, I hope you guys are well. I'm going to get back in the RV and travel back home to Oregon. And I've got a really exciting announcement to make about this. We've got some exciting stuff coming for the Dr. Tyna Show. So I'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Tyna Show. This is a Wellness Loud production produced by Drake Peterson and mixed by Mike Fry. Theme song is by John the Guilt. You can watch the full video version of this podcast inside the Spotify app or on YouTube. As always, you can email the podcast at podcast@drtyna.com. That's DRTYNA. And if you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can also find all of my offerings on my website at drtyna.com. For more shows by my team, go to wellnessloud.com. See you next time, and thanks for listening. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practices of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is intended not to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.